Hello, welcome and thank you for coming today. There's a lot going on our campus today. Classes are canceled and schools closed. So hopefully a lot of folk will end up here as a part of that. We continue the North Seattle College Art Gallery's virtual visiting artist lecture series that we started 2 years ago in the fall of 2020. Today, I'm especially excited as we have the pleasure of a lecture by LaToya Hobbs. Yay. I am Amanda Knoll, coordinator of the NSC Art Gallery and printmaking and drawing instructor in the art department at North Seattle College. I'm pleased to work with Desiree Beadle, who is my assistant in the gallery. Desiree will be working behind the scenes here today, so we'll just give her a hand for all that she does. We have live transcript available for those of you who want it. Those of you who don't want it or find it distracting, you can turn it off by clicking hide subtitle button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or turn it on by clicking show subtitle in that same space down in the live transcript button. Use it if you wish, hide it if you wish, but we want to be sure that we have it for those who need it. First, some acknowledgements, and I will share my screen. Okay, we start with a land acknowledgement. North Seattle College acknowledges that we occupy the lands of the Coast Salish peoples, the descendants of the first peoples of this region, a people whose cultures endure and are valued. Without this land and these cultures, we would not have access to this gathering, dialogue, and learning space. We take this moment to honor and thank the original caretakers of this land, their ancestors, and their descendants who are still here. We encourage participants here today to consider our responsibilities as we stand in solidarity with the sovereignty, cultural heritage, and lives of Native, Indigenous, and First Nations people. Also, a labor acknowledgement. We also pause to recognize and acknowledge the labor that created the United States and from which we all benefit. We remember that our nation is built on the labor of enslaved people who were forcibly brought to the United States from the African continent, and we recognize the continued contribution of their survivors. We acknowledge immigrant labor and recognize that voluntary forced and prison labor contribute to the building and ongoing maintenance of our nation. We acknowledge all unpaid caregiving labor. Additionally, we acknowledge the critical importance of the work towards racial equity that continues across this country in response to racial injustice and generations of structural racism against BIPOC communities. And then our third slide is what we are doing to continue to work to go from acknowledgement to deed. We know that it's not enough to just acknowledge the land and labor. We have to be sure that we're taking action. You hear what actions North Seattle College and the North Seattle College Art Department are taking to support BIPOC individuals and institutions and to be held accountable. This slide needs updating. As I know, we are all doing more than what is listed here. We recommend Real Rent Duwamish, which Desiree will put up in the chat, and you can explore that link as you will. Thank you. I have a couple announcements and then we'll get to the nitty gritty here. The current show in the North Seattle College Art Gallery is an abstraction show called Distilled Contemporary Abstraction. Although the gallery is closed today, sorry about that. We are working to have an informal artist talk by the local artists included in the show in the art gallery in person on December 8th, which is a Thursday from 5 to 6 p.m. And there'll be more soon on that. We hope to see you there. You can sign up for emails by contacting us at nscartgallery@seattlecolleges.edu. The gallery is open Monday through Thursday, 11 to 5, and Fridays, 11 to 2 through the end of the show, which ends mid-January, so January 13th, 2023. We will be closed this Thursday and Friday in honor of the Thanksgiving holiday, and we will be on winter break December 19th, back on, I think, January 3rd. We also continue to have virtual visiting artist lectures. It started during the pandemic from need, and we found it really helpful for our classes and also just to have people from across the country come to talk with us. The next one is on Monday, January 31st, 2023. We have Julia Hinexius, an artist and our new full-time jewelry teacher talking with us. Please keep checking in with the gallery on Facebook, Instagram, and on our website to find out who will be talking and when. We urge you to visit our website for links to recordings of all the talks to date, as well as a list of upcoming visiting artists. We will post our links in the chat. Thank you. With this, it's finally time to introduce you to our visiting artist, LaToya Hobbs. It is an absolute pleasure to have LaToya here today. I'm a huge fan and always show LaToya's work to my printmaking classes when they do self-portraits. Her portraits are thoughtful and beautiful. LaToya M. Hobbs is a painter and printmaker, wife and mother of two from Little Rock, Arkansas, who is currently living and working in Baltimore, Maryland. She received her BA in painting from the University of Arkansas at Little Rock and an MFA in printmaking from Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana. Her work deals with figurative imagery that addresses the ideas of beauty, cultural identity, and womanhood as they relate to women of the African diaspora. Her exhibition record includes numerous national and international venues, including the National Gallery of Namibia in Windhoek, Namibia, SCAD Museum of Art, Albrecht Knox Museum, Sophia Wanamaker Galleries in San Jose, Costa Rica. And most recently, she exhibited a special project entitled Sistership at the International Fine Art Print Dealers Association Fair at the Javits Center in New York City. And she has work included in The Power of Portraiture, selections from the Department of Drawing and Prints showing at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Her work is housed in private and public collections, such as the Harvard Art Museum, Prochusky Family Foundation Collection of African American Art, and the National Art Gallery of Namibia, the Getty Research Institute, and the Baltimore Museum of Art. Other accomplishments include the 2020 Janet and Walter Sondheim Artscape Prize, a nomination for the 2022 Queen Sonia Print Award, and a 2022 IFPDA Artist Grant. Hobbs is a professor at the Maryland Institute College of Art and a founding member of Black Women of Print, a collective whose vision is to make visible the narratives and works of Black women printmakers, past, present, and future. I will hand you over to LaToya, but before I do, I want to let the audience know that we will be taking questions in the chat today. So if questions or comments arise during the talk, please write them in the chat and we will hopefully get to all of them. As usual, we will be sending a transcript of the chat to LaToya after the talk. So if you want to comment on the work in her words, please do, but you might be specific about what you're commenting on as she will see your words after the talk. But I encourage you to support her ideas, and her work in the chat. Welcome virtually to Seattle, and thank you so much for coming to speak with us, LaToya.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. Well, again, thank you for having me. Thank you so much to Amanda for inviting me. I always say it's like an honor when people willingly sit and listen to me talk about my work. So I'm just going to basically share some of my recent and past work with you. As they mentioned in the bio, LaToya Hobbs, originally from Arkansas, living and working in Baltimore. I'm a professor at Maryland Institute College of Art, also a mother. I always like to start presentations with an image of my family, just because they're, so integral to what I do and so much a part of the work that I'm exploring now. That's myself, my husband, Harrison, who's also an amazing artist, and our two little art children. My oldest son is Ade, he's now 8, and my youngest son is Theo, he's now 6. So I'm going to start off just by sharing some of my print influences, well, art influences in general. This is a very, very short list. So these are kind of some of the core people. And so there are lots more people that I can say who influenced my work, but it's kind of showing you the core group of people just for sake of time. So the first artist that I am going to acknowledge is Elizabeth Catlett. I think anybody who has been following my work for a while knows that she's been such a big influence on my practice. One of the reasons why I wanted to study printmaking more seriously. So I always, affectionately call her my art mother. Next major influence is Charles White, just amazing draftsman and amazing printmaker. I've kind of been looking at his work a little bit more closely more recently, just because I think He's such a master of line, and I think he is a really strategic with what he leaves on the plate. I think sometimes we're so focused on what we take away when we're carving from our matrices, but he's really strategic about what he's leaving on the plate, and that's something I've been really paying attention to with my work. In terms of like one of my earliest influences for my painting practice was Berkeley L. Hendricks. I saw his show Birth of the Cool at the Studio Museum in Harlem on my very first trip to New York. They had a solo show of his, and it kind of just affirmed me as a painter and the type of images that I wanted to make that celebrated people in my community. Next is a more current influence, Angelica Crosby, just phenomenal work. I really like the way she takes these very different materials and techniques and approaches it and kind of brings them all together on the same surface in this very seamless and cohesive way. I also like the way she plays with the idea of interior space and how she uses that to inform the identity of her subjects. And so that's something I've been playing with in my work as well. And then the last person that I'll briefly mention is Kerry James Marshall, a master. I saw his exhibition Mastery when it was traveling around the country. When it came to New York, I think that was maybe 5-6 years ago, but that was just another kind of life-changing experience for me, just to see so much great work all in one space in one time by one person. And so he is like, specifically influenced some of my more recent pieces as well. Okay, so the next section, I'm going to just talk a little bit about some of my early works in terms of my printmaking practice. I think that's kind of the thing that people recognize my work for now. It's more like my print-based work. But I started off as a painter in undergrad after switching from being a biology major and struggling with that for a bit. But I kind of slowly fell in love with printmaking after being required to take a printmaking class. So these are some of my first linoleum cuts. There's some that were before these, but they're really bad, so I don't like to show. So these are some of the earliest works that I'm willing to show to people. But this is around 2009, where I really started to really fall in love with printmaking and take it more seriously. I started taking independent studies, focusing on relief, just so I could get better at that particular medium. So all of these few slides are kind of within the same year. So you can kind of see the progression and the growth that kind of happened over that time. And it really just, me kind of exerting my passion for this medium and wanting to get better at it. Because I think I decided when I wanted to go to graduate school that I was going to focus on printmaking for my studies. So I wanted to build up a nice portfolio of works, of woodcuts and linoleum cuts to apply for graduate school. See here, kind of bringing color and multiple block printing into the mix. And then here, I think these were some of I think this was the first wood block that I did when I went to graduate school. Also, you can see there's an increase in scale. With some of the previous images, they were around maybe 18 by 24 or 20 by 30, somewhere in that range. But here there's kind of a big increase in scale, almost 4 feet by 3 feet in some instances. Also, this is the time where I started to really explore pattern in my work. And I'll kind of talk about that a little bit later. Another kind of early print. So all of these prints that I'm showing in this section are from 2009 to 2012. And so in a lot of my later images, you'll see that in addition to working with the figure, I use a lot of patterns in my work, and majority of my patterns are created by the use of Adinkra symbols. And so if you're not familiar with that term, Adinkra symbols are most commonly associated with West African culture. And they're, basically like a visual language. And so lots of different symbols that have different meanings, and a lot of them kind of just talk about life and relationships and just kind of standards that we, should live by, basically. They kind of relate to some of the themes that I've been exploring in my work. So a couple more early cuts. And this piece is titled Double Portrait Marcy. A lot of these images were from my thesis work from graduate school. And so they're from a series titled Beautiful Uprising. And so I was kind of exploring the relationship of beauty, identity, and culture. and how that related to Black women in particular. So I was focusing a lot on kind of 3 specific areas: our hair texture, our skin complexion, and our just kind of our overall sense of our body image. So in a lot of these portraits, you'll see exaggerated like hair textures, really focusing on like hair as a medium of itself is something that I think about in terms of like the texture and the sculptural quality of our hair. Here's another example of this kind of double portrait, kind of, also a means of like self-examination. So kind of questioning myself and other people about the beauty practices that we choose to kind of uphold as Black women. Okay. And so this image, I think, is important because it's the first iteration of me exploring bringing my painting and printmaking practice together, which is something that I am really into right now. I did a series of nude portraits, again, kind of exploring our sense of our body image, just show different aspects of what could be considered beautiful. And I was really thinking about just kind of in art education, how we do this classical study of the nude. And I really didn't see myself or Black women as a part of that conversation and a lot of the research that I was doing, and also kind of thinking about, just the type of images that I saw in my art history classes. So I wanted to kind of bring us into that narrative as well. And with part of this series, I interviewed the models for these portraits. And the first thing that I did was I put their words as the kind of base layer on the wood panels. It's kind of hard to see from the image, but you can, if you look closely, you can see that there's like text in the background. And so those are literally the models' words. And so for me, that kind of symbolized these women being represented mind and body, not just the physical. But yeah, so this is like the time where I was kind of bringing everything together. So you can see there's a lot of different media involved in this work. There's ink, there's acrylic, there's prints that I like collaged and cut up and put into the work. There's also carving on the flesh of the figure and then kind of painting and, so exploring, taking all these very different things and putting them together in an interesting way. So here's another example. Works from that series. And this piece is titled "My Hair Was the Least of My Worries." So, I also used the models' interviews, their words, and, created titles for each of the pieces as well. Okay, so now we're going to fast forward a little bit to some of my more current works, and kind of just giving an overview of my practice and the type of work that I do now. It's very much still grounded in my identity as a printmaker and as a painter, but in a lot of my current works, I call them like hybrid works, because they bring both elements or both parts of those worlds together. So this piece is titled Self-Portrait Number 3. As you can see, you'll see in the slides, I do a lot of self-portraits, especially with the series that I'm working on now. This is an example of like, I would call my more traditional printmaking work. I really love Black and white prints. I do experiment with color, as you can see with some of the previous images, but over the last few years with my print work, I've been really just, consumed with this, making like really nice, bold, and vivid Black and white prints. This is the most recent woodcut that I've done. It's titled Stargazer Theo. It's a portrait of my youngest son. Again, a nod to kind of my traditional practice as a printmaker. I don't do a lot of editions, but, I kind of break them out every now and then. But when I do edition works, I tend to keep them kind of small. So this work was an edition of 15. I actually produced this when I was a visiting artist at Austin Peay University in Tennessee earlier this year. Okay, and then I have what I like to call like hybrid works, I guess, or kind of my mixed media work. So it kind of plays off of bringing elements of my printmaking practice and painting practice together. So with this particular work titled Nina's Gaze, I took like a wood panel or a wood block and kind of used that as a matrix and produced a set of prints from them. But then I kind of went back to the block itself and thought about how I can activate this as a painting or as an art object in and of itself. And I kind of started exploring this idea of the matrix as the art object. And in 2012, with those kind of first mixed media works, and I kind of took a break from that when I graduated and I kind of started a family, but when I got back into like, more heavily into my practice after my second son, I kind of, brought back this idea of using the block as the art object instead of it just being something that I use to create a set of images from or a set of prints from. And for me, that kind of happened naturally because I don't know, I spend so much time carving on the blocks, and I just kind of become enamored with the texture, and I spend so much time with the block, and I just really love the block itself. And then sometimes I wouldn't be as excited about the prints that I made from the block, but more attached to the block itself. So I just kind of like question, well, why can't the block be, an art object? And so really taking the aspect of my printmaking practice, which is the carving, is something that I really, really enjoy, and bringing that into the realm of my mixed media work as a painter. So again, we have like traditional prints like these, and then we have works where I kind of try to do both. So taking a block, producing a set of images, and then kind of going back to the block and saying, okay, well, how can I transform this in some type of different way? Here's another example of that, a more current example. So here is the woodcut. And then this is the block that I produced the woodcut from. So I went back and add some hand painting and some collage, just to see how I can activate it in a different way. And then we have what I call like my mixed media paintings. And so with a block like this, it's not intended to have anything printed from it. And so the block is the work itself. And when I show these images online, sometimes I think people just automatically think they're works on paper, but they're not. So they're wood panels that I'm actually carving into the surface of the wood panel, the same way I would activate like a traditional wood block matrix. Instead of printing it, I am taking that and adding other elements to it, like collage and painting. So with this image, you can see from the detail, like all those marks are literally me carving to the surface of the wood panel. And then like the clothing are like things that I hand printed and collaged into the work. So, just kind of different elements of myself in my printmaking practice, and then also kind of combining elements of myself as a painter. It's really fun for me to take these very separate processes and put them together in a seamless way. And I like for the viewer to kind of have to spend some time with the work to try to figure out like what's what. And here's another example of a current work. And so like the clothing that they're wearing, so those are, I use the same type of paper that I make my relief prints from. It's called Okinawa. So I use that to do like these hand printed textiles. And then that becomes like the material that I use to dress the figures in the work. Next few images that I'm going to show, as well as some of the previous ones, are from a series that I've been working on titled Salt of the Earth. And I describe it as an extended series. So it started, I would say a few years ago, but actually I got the idea for the series in graduate school. The term like Salt of the Earth came to me, and I was like, okay, that's going to be like the next title of the next big series that I am going to do. But I didn't actually start working on it until I would say maybe 2018, 2019, probably, 2017, 2018, shortly after I had my second son. But I feel like it hasn't been until maybe the past 3 or 4 years that I really started to make the work that I feel exemplifies the series. But that term Salt of the Earth, in case you're not familiar, it comes from this Bible scripture, Matthew 5:13. It's on the screen there, but I'll just read it quickly. It says, "You are the salt of the earth, but what if the salt loses its savor? Wherefore shall it be salted? It is therefore good for nothing but to be cast out and to be trodden under the foot of men." And so for me, that phrase, kind of salt of the earth, for me reminds me of women and the work that we do, that how we act as a preserver of our families and culture and community. So even though I had the idea for Salt of the Earth, it really didn't make sense for me what that actually meant until I became a mother. And so a lot of these pieces are self-portraits and portraits of other women who I feel kind of embody this idea of a matriarch. And I'm also kind of questioning, like, what is a matriarch, right? So what does that mean for women now? So not all the women that I feature in this series are mothers necessarily, but I feel like they kind of embody the characteristics of a matriarch in terms of them building community or preserving something, or, kind of building something that extends beyond themselves. So the first piece that I will talk about in this series is titled Birth of a Mother. Self-portrait, so talking about my experience as a mom. And so the title, I think it kind of plays on the idea of me pregnant, getting ready to have my first son. So I'm birthing a child, but at the same time, I am being birthed into this experience of becoming a mother. And for me, that was like a lot of fear, to be honest, at that time, a lot of gray areas. And so that's kind of why like gray dominates the palette. I also just really love gray, but symbolically gray kind of dominates the palette just to kind of show the uncertainty that I had at the time. Also kind of questioning like my capabilities of being an artist. So for a long time, I was afraid, like, I don't know, that people wouldn't take me seriously as an artist now that I'm a mother. So I was kind of really fearful of that. I was also kind of questioning, like, am I going to be able to keep my job? Because at the time I had just, I think I was finishing up my first year and a half at MICA. And I was on a year-to-year contract. So I was like, oh, are they going to, hire me back now that I'm pregnant? I don't have like maternity leave. I haven't had enough time to have that. So I was just, a lot of things that I was just kind of fearful of. And so I avoided talking about motherhood in my work. I didn't want to be labeled as, the motherhood artist, or, I just, you just kind of have these fears. Or I heard stories about women who were kind of dropped by the galleries after the gallery found out they were pregnant. It's all these kind of horror stories. And so I was kind of, in that same type of fearful place. But after a while, I kind of just, said that I shouldn't have to be afraid to acknowledge just part of myself in my work. And so this picture was actually taken in 2015, but I actually didn't create a work about it until like almost 5 years later. So it's another portrait. So this is titled Portrait of a Mother. And so this one, it kind of leans a little bit more toward my practice as a painter. You can see there's lots of different elements there. So I kind of just walk through each part. So the background is painted with acrylic, and that, that stencil is like an alligator symbol. So that kind of means like duality, or like the duality of like existing on land and at water at the same time is something that the crocodile is known for. And so I feel like that's an attribute that I've had to take on as a mother, like being able to exist in lots of different types of ways. So I purposely put that as the background for this piece, kind of functioning like wallpaper of the space. And then my skin is painted in like oil paint. Again, kind of, a nod to my more traditional aspects of me as a painter. And then the dress is carved. So that texture you see is me literally carving into the surface of the wood panel, laying ink down and like rolling paint over, kind of the same way I would ink up a block. So again, I like taking those very different processes and, figuring out a way to make them work all together. And this image is titled The Everyday. Yeah, so you can kind of see these different facets of myself as a mother at these various stages. And so this work is significant to me because it is the first work where I actually use my children in a piece. So as I mentioned before, I was adamant. I'm not going to, include, my children or family in my work. But I was like, that's a really big part of who I am and something that I should be able to acknowledge in my work. And I think part of the appeal for my work is that it comes from a very authentic place. It's I show images that people can relate to. And I feel like, it is my real life. And so people, I think, can kind of feel that through the work. But this piece is titled The Everyday because, mom is an everyday job. And so another thing that's significant about this work is that it's the first instance where I referenced another artist in my work, which is something that I've been doing a lot. So that image in the background is a painting, but it's a reference to Alma Thomas, who is a really amazing abstract painter, another wonderful Black woman artist. Originally from DC, the DC area. That came about. I was actually supposed to paint a window in the piece, but I was like, deadlines don't stop for anybody. And I was like, I'm not going to have enough time to paint the window scene that I was intending, but, I had to come up with something that I could do that would make sense because I couldn't change everything else. And I was talking about Alma Thomas's work in my color theory class that I was teaching at the time. And so it just kind of, made sense that I could, I could make a painting in back of us. So that's kind of how that came about. And then this work is an image of my mother. Her name is Angela, but people her nickname is kind of Queen Anne is what people call her. But earlier I mentioned that this series has kind of been a way for me to think about like womanhood, different facets of womanhood, but, kind of motherhood in particular, and the idea of a matriarch, and really this idea of legacy, right? So as a mother, what has been passed down to me, and then in turn, what am I kind of passing down to my children? So this work is a nod again to my birth mother, but also to my art mothers as well. So in the background, I'm referencing two women artists. On the left side of the composition is a reference to Elizabeth Catlett. Again, really major influence on my work. That's another one of my favorite pieces of hers. And then on the other side of the composition is a piece by Samela Lewis, who is a really amazing artist and art historian. So she's done a lot to kind of, chronicle and document the African American canon of artists. So paying homage to my physical mother, but also these women who are considered my art mothers as well. And then again, in this work, you can see lots of different processes happening. Like the skin, again, is painted with oil. The clothing is carved. Other elements are collaged and hand painted. So a lot of very different processes happening at the same time. Here's another portrait of my mother. And this work is kind of in two parts. So this is titled How Janetta Taught Us to Pray. And it's a homage to my grandmother. Her name was Janetta. So just thinking about, again, this idea of like, what have people imparted to me? What have my foremothers given to me? And what traditions have they established for my family? I grew up in Arkansas, so people, call that the Bible Belt. So I grew up kind of going to church a lot. And so kind of my prayer and spirituality is something that is kind of dear to me and, grounds me. And so I have memories of my grandmother. When I used to stay with her in the summers, all of my cousins, she would like wake us up in the morning, like really, really early to get up and pray. And so I was telling my mom about that memory, and she said, oh yeah, she did the same thing with us too when we were little. And so this is kind of, a homage to her. So this portrait is of my mother again, and it's kind of like position of prayer to kind of acknowledge that memory and that sense of prayer that was passed down from my grandmother. And then here's a portrait of me with the same sentiment. But yeah, with this piece, again, it's on a wood panel. Again, lots of different techniques and processes happening on the same thing. And I wanted to dress my mother and I, different clothing, but the same pattern, as you can see in this image, just to kind of show our connection as mother and daughter. The lighting in this piece is a lot different than some of the other ones, just because I wanted to show kind of this kind of like dim early morning kind of time of day to reference that particular memory. So now I'm going to segue a little bit. So these are still current works, but this year I was given a grant by IFPDA. And so IFPDA stands for International Fine Print Dealers Association. So they have a really amazing fair every year. So they offer grants to artists to do like a special project or have their own type of installation space. So when they contacted me and notified they wanted to give me a grant, they said I can, make a new work and show whatever I want. And they also mentioned, that we really want you to show, if you can, one of those large carved pieces that you do. And so when I was thinking about what to do, there was a particular image that I had received or saw from somebody that I used to attend church with. And so they had these beautiful daughters. And so I automatically thought about that photo as something that I wanted to kind of create. So I did a new piece around that work, and I'll talk more about it in the next slides. And then I also wanted to show this series that I did on the Black Women of Print founding members to coincide with our work that is currently on view at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So these next slides, I'm talking about the creation of this new work for IFPDA Fair, but you can also kind of get a little bit of sense of my process as well. So I like to start with a flat black surface when I create my pieces. And that is not only for my like mixed media painting work, but also for my like traditional print work as well. And so I tend to do a lot of like really detailed images with a lot of like intricate mark making, but sometimes like I have a tendency to carve away too much from the blocks, and I kind of lose like the rich contrast that I am kind of aiming for. And so I kind of developed this process of painting the wood panels black and drawing with a white pencil, because it gives me like a pretty close idea of what I print or what the piece is going to look like without me having to proof it so many times. So you can see here me prepping the wood blocks for these new pieces. And this wood is cherry wood. So I like to work on a hard wood just because, you know, it can hold these really nice, fine detailed lines if I choose to print something. And so from there, I developed my drawing in a white pencil, which you can kind of see here. I don't talk about drawing specifically, but a lot in my presentations, but it's a really, really important part of my practice. I think, you know, drawing is so important, and regardless of if you're a sculptor or a designer, if you like to draw or paint, I think drawing is just so important to all like art mediums and all art disciplines. And so when I am developing my drawing, I spend a lot of time really developing it and making sure that I know all aspects of what's going to happen. Because when I get to the carving process, I don't want to have to like make a lot of guesses and make a lot of changes, because, you know, once you carve it, it's gone, right? It's not like you can kind of put it back in. So something I like to say is like, when in doubt, don't cut it out. So if you're not sure what's going to happen, you know, spend some time with the image and make sure you understand all parts of what's going to happen. So again, this image shows the drawing that's fully done, and then me starting the carving process. And so when I'm carving, what's helpful for me is to start with whatever is the brightest object that's closest to the viewer. And so when I was kind of styling people and thinking about the clothing, whoever had like a white shirt on or something that was like almost white, I kind of started with that. So the first thing that I carved was like this white shirt over here on the far left side of the composition, and then these white pants in the middle, and then like this fuzzy sweater on the other side. And then I kind of just worked down from there. So it's really important for me to have a sense of like depth and atmospheric perspective. And that can kind of be hard to do, you know, when you're thinking about like woodcut as a medium. So I kind of start with whatever the brightest thing is and kind of like temper the value down from there, if that makes sense. Texture is also really important to me. And so with these figures, I definitely wanted all of their clothing to kind of have a different feel and a different type of texture, and also like with the background as well. So here's a couple of images in the studio working. With these large pieces, I like to work with them directly on the wall, just because it's important for me to be able to step back and take a look at the work and kind of compare values and contrasts and see how everything's working all together. So there's a lot of like carving up close and then stepping back across the room and kind of going back and forth in that manner. And then here you can see the final piece. And so the title of this work is Jeanette's Daughters. Jeanette is the pastor of a church I used to attend when I was at the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville, before I transferred to the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. And so at the time when I was going to that church, all of these women, they're women now, but they were all babies the last time I saw them. And so when I saw this recent photo of them, it was something I was definitely inspired to want to make a piece about them. It kind of ties into the things that I've been thinking about in terms of like the matriarch and legacy. So thinking about their mother as the matriarch of their family, and kind of, you know, how she imparted to me when I was at their church, but then also what she's imparted to her daughters as well. And so other elements that are a part of this work are the pattern in the background. So that is an Adinkra symbol called a Nakoma, and it means conjoined hearts. And so, you know, kind of hinting at their relationship as sisters and the bond that they have. And also wanted to include some type of foliage in this scene. In the original photo, they were like outdoors. And so I kind of wanted to still have an outdoor feel, but have some way to include my pattern work as well. And so I chose ivy because ivy is symbolic of like the strong bond that it has with whatever type of surface that it grows on. And so for me, it kind of represents, again, the bond that they have as family and as sisters as well. And here's a close-up. So you can kind of see like some of the carving and the detail line work. Okay, so now I'm going to show images of the series that I did of the founding members of Black Women of Print. As Amanda mentioned in my bio, I am a founding member of this organization. So part of our goal is to basically, bring visibility to women who are doing printmaking. And so I wanted to do that through this series to acknowledge all the people who kind of worked to bring the organization together. So here in this shot, you can kind of see the working stage of of the portraits and kind of see them in various stages. When I have like a lot of pieces that I have to get done, I kind of work on them all at the same time, kind of like an assembly line. So with these pieces, I painted them all Black first, and then I did the backgrounds for all of them, and then I did all, because I kind of do everything like an assembly line, just because it helps me to, get a lot done. And then if I get stuck on a piece, there's always something else in progress I can kind of go to and move back and forth. So you can see, various stages. Some are just painting with drawing, and then some you see painting, drawing, and collaging. So you can kind of get an idea of the studio flow. But the first portrait, this is of Tanikia Word. She's actually the person who came up with the idea of Black Women of Print. Yeah, she is located in Milwaukee. This is Stephanie Santana. All these women are printmakers, and so we kind of execute our practices in various ways. Tanikia does a lot of relief, combining things like hand embroidering as well. Stephanie Santana is originally like a textile artist, but she also does screen printing as a part of her printmaking practice. She's in New York. This is my portrait. This is Delita Martin. So some of these people are no longer members, but these were like the original 7 who kind of started things. Delita is in Texas. She kind of does like everything. Again, the same idea of bringing a lot of different processes together. She does relief, lithography, she sews into her work, draws and paints, a lot of different things. This is Jennifer Mack Watkins. She is located in Savannah, Georgia. She does like traditional mokuhanga, like Japanese wood block printing, also just relief printing, screen printing. This is Angela Pilgrim. She's in New York as well. She does screen printing primarily as her practice. And this is Leslie Duca, who also primarily does screen printing. So like I said, not everybody is still a part of the collective, but these were the people who started the first people to kind of start the organization. And I wanted to do something to honor all of them and, again, bring visibility to these different women and the practices that they have. So this slide shows an image of our inaugural portfolio continuum. So this is currently on view in the exhibition, The Power of Portraiture, Selections from the Department of Drawings and Prints at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So when I was invited to present at the IFPDA fair, they told me that the Met was one of their partners and they would have our portfolio on display. So it just made sense for me to bring that portrait series. So we're represented kind of in both of those places. So I guess the last work I'm going to talk about is a piece that I finished last year titled Carving Out Time. So this is like a significant work for me. And I think it's one of the most significant works that I've done to date. But in a nutshell, I kind of describe this as a portrait of my day. And so the work is a large scale relief carving. It's 8 feet tall and 60 feet wide. And it takes you through my day as a mom and practicing artist. So it's one work divided in 5 parts. And so each of these scenes kind of takes you through different facets of my day. There's a video. I won't show the video because I only have like 8 minutes, but if you want to check out this video, well, I guess I can show a few seconds. Just as working people, parents, whatever your walk of life is, we all have to have these daily negotiations of how am I going to get all these things done with the time that I have today. And I think that's a conversation that I'm constantly having to have. What to put the most emphasis on or what to put the most focus on. How can I get as much off of my to-do lists in the day as possible? And so I think, again, that's another way that I think so many people can relate to the work. So.
My name is LaToya Hobbs. I am a practicing artist, specifically working with painting and printmaking, located in Baltimore, Maryland, originally from Little Rock, Arkansas. I'm also a mother, wife, and educator. So from the onset of the work, I wanted it to be large scale. Actually, the goal was to have it life size because I'm giving you a look into my everyday life. So the scale kind of reflects the intent of the content. And then also I was really inspired by this large scale woodcut executed by Carrie James Marshall. So it shows the scene of people kind of in this domestic space. I believe they're maybe in a high-rise project, but the work is massive. I believe it's like 8 feet tall and it's maybe 12 panels wide. So when I first encountered that work, I was just like blown away. I was not aware of like any type of like print work that had been executed on that scale. So initially seeing the work, I was like, man, I don't even see being able to do anything like that. But I encountered the work again a few years later in 2019 in Miami, and it just kind of ignited a love and a fire and a passion. The passion of seeing that work, it just really inspired me to want to execute something of my own on that same grandiose scale. Because I wanted it to feel authentic to our life, we decided like what day we were going to do images. So after I made the list of everything that was going to be incorporated in the work, I just did loose sketches to say, okay, with this scene, it's going to be in this room. These people are going to be in the scene. We're going to be doing this. So I kind of did that for each section of the work. And so once I had kind of a loose sketch and general idea of what I wanted each scene to look like, we did photo shoots. So no one photo was absolutely perfect, what I needed. So I had to kind of take tidbits from like maybe 7 or 8 different photos to kind of compose each scene. So after we had photos, I did more detailed sketches to kind of plan things out. So I said, okay, my figure is going to come from this photo. The children's figure is going to come from this photo. I like the hand in this photo to go on this body. So I kind of did a lot of choreographing to compose the scenes. And then once I had the rough sketch based on the photos, then I did like a more detailed sketch to scale to kind of map everything out. And then still putting in like the vanishing point. This is where the horizon line is going to be. I need to adjust this space and start sort of combining different parts of the spaces together also. So coordinating the figures, but also sometimes simplifying or adding more to the space. Yeah, so I wanted them to be in the work.
Okay, I'm going to pause there just for sake of time, but I'll briefly walk you through each of the scenes. So as I mentioned, it's one work in 5 parts, kind of like how you think about like acts of a play. And so, when I was thinking about the idea of the work, I was like, well, what do I do in a day? And so I just started writing everything down. I'm like, well, I can't possibly make it work with all of these things. And so I kind of narrowed it down to 5 basic, kind of segments or parts of the day. And then kind of thought about what type of scene could illustrate that phase of the day. And so this first part of the work is titled Morning. So, it shows kind of the start of the day, and it shows all of the members of my family, just kind of showing this kind of iconic hallmark moment of, kids jumping in the bed, waking their parents up in the morning time, which is something they did a lot when they were younger. But I will briefly mention that in all of these scenes, there are references to other artists. Again, these are, some of the same artists that I mentioned who have influenced my practice in some way. And so I'm kind of like dreaming vicariously through my like artwork. So I could probably never own these artworks, but I could, pretend to have them in my artwork. So above the bed, there's again another reference to Alma Thomas's work and another reference to Elizabeth Catlett's work. I'll move on to a detail shot so you can see some of the carving up close. And then this next scene is titled Homeschool and Housework. Yeah, kind of referencing, again, all the roles that I play at home. So in addition to teaching at MICA, I also homeschool. my children as well. And so I think, when I was making this work, this was kind of during the height of the pandemic. So I started in 2020 and finished the work in 2021. And so many parents are kind of thrust into this role of like being the homeschool teacher, when all of the schools and everything closed down. So I definitely wanted to have an image that referenced that. So it's kind of normal for us, but again, so many parents were just kind of automatically thrown into this, role of having to do work at home and also having to teach kids at home just because everything was shut down. I also had a goal to have as many different types of textures as possible in this piece, just kind of as a personal challenge for my carving practice and carving technique. And so, that's kind of evident in this work. There's a laundry basket with different towels and sheets, and then the clothing, and then the toys and animals. So I really wanted everything to kind of have a different feel and a different texture. And then the artwork in this scene that I'm referencing on the top of the bookshelf, there's another reference to a sculpture by Elizabeth Catlett. So in addition to being an amazing printmaker, she was also a really phenomenal sculptor. And then on the right side of the composition, there is a nod to Margaret Burroughs, who's another amazing printmaker. And here's a close-up of that scene. This is the third scene of the work, titled Dinner Time. So it kind of represents like the apex of the work, or kind of like the height of the day. All members of the family are there, we're present and active. Yeah, and the two artworks that I'm referencing in this piece, this is a reference to Valerie Maynard, another amazing Black woman printmaker who unfortunately passed away last month. And then over here is a reference to Kerry James Marshall's, one of his paintings, one of my favorite paintings of his. Yeah, so this scene was, I think, one of the hardest for me to do throughout the works. Just, trying to figure out, how do I carve a granite countertop, or, how do I try to, replicate this Kerry James Marshall painting? It was very like intimidating for me, but, I think it came out well. So here's a close-up, a detail shot of that. And then we have the fourth section of the work titled Bedtime for the Boys. So it kind of represents, I guess, I don't know, one of the parts that I always look forward to is, getting the kids to bed. And so, in addition to the like figures in the work, I thought of each room as its own character as well. So I really wanted each room to have a different type of feel and look to it. So, the type of objects that are included in the room reflect the people who would occupy that space, or the type of activities that would be taking place. And so since this is represents my children's room, definitely wanted like toys to be there and maps, and including their drawings in the work. And you can see on the next slide. So these are literally my son's drawings that, I asked him to give me some pieces to put that I could, try to put inside the work. There's a reference to Basquiat, the dinosaur piece on the left. And then there's a reference to my husband's work on the other side. And then finally, we get to the end of the day where I get to take off my hat as mom and put on my like artist hat. And so this is an image of me in the studio. Actually, the room that I am now is in my basement. I have two spaces that I work in, like one space for like larger works, but at the time, this was like my primary workspace. And so with this scene, I really wanted to pay homage to myself as both parts of myself as a painter and a printmaker. And so you can see I'm holding the palette. There's a wood block in progress on the floor, lots of different works in different stages of completion to kind of give you an authentic look of what it would be like in a studio space. And then here's a close-up. And so this pose actually is a reference to another Kerry James Marshall painting. I think I showed that work at the beginning of the presentation. And then, so I was talking about the idea of like the matrix as the art object. So when I was invited to create this work to show at the Baltimore Museum of Art is where this work debuted. It was always my intent to show the wood blocks as the artwork, but my husband convinced me to also make prints from the panels as well. So I was able to produce an edition of 2 of all the scenes. And so there's a total of 15 blocks. So 3 8x4 block makes up each of the 5 scenes. So 15 blocks total. And so you can kind of see at the bottom what all the scenes look like in their printed version. Hey, and that's it. So if you want to stay connected, I have 2 IG pages, but my primary IG page is LaToya Hobbs. If you want to watch the rest of that video, that was produced by my husband, you can go to my YouTube channel, LaToya M. Hobbs Studio, and then that's my website at the bottom. So awesome. Okay.
Oh my goodness. I've been getting, a lot of the people in this room know me, and they've been sending me texts about how incredible the work is. They're just like overwhelmed. So as well as you will also be seeing that in the chat when we send it to you, just a lot of, lots of love in here for the work and for you sharing so much of yourself. Really, your daily life is like, those are things that, you know, potentially we hoard for ourselves, right? And for you to put it out there is just so generous. So we thank you for that. So
Thank you.
yeah, or just some things I wanted to just quickly say, and then we can maybe do some live also.
Okay. And I'm going to turn the chat on now that the talk is over, so I can kind of see.
Okay. Yeah, a lot of applause for the fact that you started with your early work, because to be able to see, especially, you know, our students would love to be able to see, you know, the whole thing of it, where you started and where you are. I mean, just
when I'm talking to school, like when I find out students are going to be in the audience, or if it's for a campus, like I always start with those early works, because, you know, it's like people don't always start out doing these great, amazing things. You got to do a lot of work to get there. So.
Right. And especially just thinking about yours and how, like, I show them that enormous piece, a portion of the enormous piece at the end, and I show it, and they don't even think, like, I give it to them because they have to do self-portrait. I was like, oh yeah, you have to do self-portrait? Look at this. As like, you know, we can get there. But yeah, you don't start there. And so starting smaller and starting the way you did was just beautiful in this. So thank you. But there's a lot of applause for the labor, putting the labor in the work also, like showing the labor not only of the work that you do, but also the labor of motherhood and all of that as well. So really appreciative, very relatable to a lot of folk. Someone asked, what do you do to keep physically available to do all of this work?
Physically available. Well, I will say,
or maybe able.
Physically able. Okay. Yeah. Is this in terms of like the physicality of the work? Because it is very, like, I think printmaking in general is a very labor intensive process. And so I had to really pace myself, especially when I was doing that big piece. So it took a little under a year to do that work all together, like, you know, painting the panels black, get them in the studio, drawing all the way to the end. So I do a lot of stretching. I try to stay active. Like, I like to work out. It's really important. And so every time I kind of sacrifice my workout regimen to do work, it always, like, I'm realizing I can't do that. And so I have to, like, stay moving and physically active. So I do take a lot of breaks while I'm working to massage my hands, to stretch. So just being very aware of, like, it's a very physical process. So make sure I'm taking care of my body so that I can do the work that I need to do. And then just, like, being available to do the work. I mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation that my husband is also an artist. And so he's just, like, really supportive. And so, you know, I can't do the stuff that I do, like, by myself, right? And so he's really supportive. I've never had to feel like I had to choose, which, you know, unfortunately, a lot of women artists who become mothers, a lot of times they feel like they have to choose, like, either I can be a mother or I can kind of do my artwork. But he's, like, very supportive, always pushing me and encouraging me, whatever ideas I have. Yeah, just really supportive. So he's, you know, okay with being a single parent from time to time, as we joke. So we kind of flip flop. So whoever has the next show is like, okay, you know, I go into single parent mode when he has deadlines, and then we kind of flip flop, and, you know, are really supportive of each other.
So beautiful. So nice. Yeah, there's a lot of questions about how you did all of the things you do, but I mean, that's a little bit of it's a little bit of the magic that is you, and you can keep to yourself in some ways, you know. But is it okay to, oh, Kelda, I guess that's what I was going to ask.
Thanks, Amanda. Hello, LaToya. Thank you so much. This has been really amazing. I just thought I'd jump in with a question while you read through all the accolades and the all the compliments in the chat. I'm just struck with how much you're referencing art history and really pointing to your lineage and bringing up women both historically that you've learned from, but also sort of your contemporary peers and your own family. And then I noticed that Julie Murray too was like gawking over your piece at the print fair. And I was just like, wow. So you are like, how do you feel about that? I mean, you referenced not seeing images, you know, not being represented in the art history classes that you took, but now you are like rewriting that, and students now are looking at your work, and Julie Murray too is looking at your work. And I just am sort of wondering how you're, just more thoughts on that. And I wanted to acknowledge how that distance you've covered.
It's really amazing. And I think part of that was like in my art history classes as an undergrad at the University of Arkansas, and not to bash my school or anything, because I did have a great experience there. But when it came to learning about artists of color, I pretty much had to do it. I had to do it myself. And at the time I didn't know any artists of color. I just knew, you know, I wanted to draw and I wanted to learn to paint and I wanted to be an artist. And then again, that came after struggling as a biology major for like 4 years. And then, you know, finally, you know, just acknowledging that art was the thing that made me happy and the thing that I wanted to pursue. But I had no, you know, context of any artist or even art as a career. But I was just like, this is what I want to do. And I kind of delved into it. But when I did start to get serious, I just didn't know anything. And so, one of the reasons that I realized I didn't know anything was because of my husband, who was then just my friend at the time. And so he was, you know, he's an art nerd, like a self-professed art nerd. And so he would just be talking about Kerry James Marshall and all these other people. And I had no idea who they were. And he was like, well, if you're gonna be an artist, then you need to learn some things. And so I kind of had to start my own art history journey. And so I would just literally go to the library and check out books. And so at the time I had a work study as a gallery assistant. And so on my gallery assistant time, that's when I would read and kind of do my own, you know, personal art history journey. So it's kind of like come full circle to me. And I think it's really important. I think about that as an educator as well. So the images that we show in class are who our students are going to study, right? And so I think it's my responsibility as an artist and as an educator to kind of correct that or show the other options of or who's out there making work. And so the artists that I show, the students are going to write those names down and study them. And then when they become curators or when they become collectors, those are the names that they're going to remember. So I'm really happy that I get the opportunity to share a bit of myself, a bit of the people who have inspired me and influenced me, and also to, you know, to get to be an influence as well. And I was really happy when Julie Murray too came to look at my work at the IFPDA fair.
So amazing, so good, and so worthy, right? Like it's like the work is so good, and Julie Murray too got to look at it. Someone wrote, Julie Allen wrote, I also wonder whether you have stories about how representation matters, meaning what reactions you have had from others appreciating that in your work. I think it's a little bit similar, but I'm thinking of the Parker Curry story with the Michelle Obama portrait, for example, as that sort of importance and impact.
Yeah, there's been several instances of that, but I think for me, I guess some of the most impactful and most recent has been when I had the Carving Out Time piece on display at the Baltimore Museum of Art. That was in an exhibition called All Due Respect. Basically, it was a 4-person exhibition, but we each had our own kind of individual gallery space. So it was a show of solo shows, I guess. But having that work there, it was just really impactful for me to see how people responded to the work. I saw so many people who said that, you know, they saw themselves, or so many moms who were like, man, I just was doing this morning, you know. And then one person said that this was the first time she had ever seen a Black family represented in a museum space. And so I was just like, wow, that's, I'm so honored that you first of all recognize that that's something that hasn't been present, and then for my work to kind of be the first representation of that for you. So yeah, it's just people were able to literally see themselves. Kids responded to the work, parents responded to the work. So it was just a really amazing experience for some people, just to feel seen and to feel appreciated, and for so many mothers to say that they felt seen and acknowledged through the work that I was presenting in the space.
So good. I want to be thoughtful about your time. We're over time. We could talk to you forever because your work is so lovely and you did such a nice job explaining it to us. So really thank you for it. We'll stop the recording now and we thank you.